The autumn sun slanted low over the town of Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt of St. Bridget's parking lot. Leaves, brittle and burnt orange, skittered across the cars as if racing the wind. I parked my old sedan in the corner, next to a faded blue minivan that always seemed to carry the same family, year after year. At 65, my knees ached from the climb up the church steps, and my back reminded me that age had begun to insist on its presence. But I came every Sunday, habit more than faith. And to see her, Marguerite, was an unspoken reason I tried to hide from myself. She was already there, standing near the entrance. A small silhouette in a trench coat that had once belonged to her husband before he passed 5 years ago. Willow Creek's Sunday morning crowd bustled around her, nodding politely, exchanging hellos that barely scraped the surface of connection. Marguerite's gray hair gleamed faintly under the weak sunlight, soft curls brushing her collar. Her eyes met mine briefly across the lot, and for a fraction of a second, I felt something stirring, a reckless pulse that I thought I had left behind in my youth. The church bells rang, echoing through the crisp air, pulling people inside. I hesitated at my car door, gripping the wheel a moment longer than necessary, listening to the shuffle of Sunday shoes and the faint scent of coffee from the café across the street. Marguerite's figure moved gracefully toward the steps, her hands clutching a small black purse. My heart raced, though I knew it shouldn't, and the weight of decades, married life, my children, my quiet routines, pressed against me like a boulder. Richard? Her voice was soft, carrying a note of surprise. I turned fully, trying to appear casual. Marguerite, I said, my throat dry. Morning. We fell into step side by side, walking slowly across the parking lot. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and engine oil, a combination that somehow felt intimate. Nobody else noticed the way our hands brushed as we passed cars. A fleeting contact charged with years of shared memories from long ago town festivals and PTA meetings before life had dragged us into obligations and marriages. You came early, I said, trying to fill the silence that threatened to widen. I like the quiet, she replied, her voice almost a whisper, like a secret meant only for me. You too, I suppose. I nodded, feeling the truth of it in my chest. Yes, I came early, to steal minutes of this forbidden proximity. To see her face light up in a way that made my knees weaker than the old church steps ever could. The lot emptied quickly as parishioners disappeared into the church, leaving us almost alone. Marguerite stopped near my car, turning to face me. Her eyes held a question I wasn't ready to answer. Do we dare? The years between us, the marriages, the losses, the quiet betrayals of routine, made the thought scandalous, absurd even. And yet, there was a gravity in her gaze that pulled me forward. Richard, she said again, softer this time, and the sound was a caress. Before I could answer, she leaned forward. Her lips touched mine lightly, almost shyly, in the middle of the church parking lot. The moment was electric, suspended in the late autumn air, yet weighted with all the impossible complications of our lives. I felt a jolt, a rush of warmth that cut through decades of restrained living, marital obligations, and whispered sermons. I pulled back slightly, breathless, caught between shame and exhilaration. Marguerite, my voice cracked, betraying the calm facade I tried to maintain. I know, she murmured, her hand brushing against mine. I know what we're doing is wrong. But I also know what we've been missing. A car drove by slowly, its driver oblivious, a minor witness to our audacity. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, loud and unrelenting. The parking lot, normally mundane and unremarkable, became a private stage for desire long suppressed. We stood there, suspended between choices and consequences. I thought of my wife, of our 40 years together, the quiet dinners, the unspoken resentments, the comfortable coexistence that had calcified into predictability. And yet, here was Marguerite, a spark that threatened to ignite the dry tinder of my soul. "Do you want to do this?" I asked, though the question was almost rhetorical. She smiled faintly, a mixture of mischief and melancholy. "I think we already are." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves around our feet, as if the town itself were holding its breath. My hand found hers, fingers intertwining instinctively. There was a softness, a carefulness in that touch, a knowing that we were stepping into a realm from which there would be no easy return. And yet, in that church parking lot, beneath the watchful gaze of an autumn sun, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in decades. We lingered there, neither moving toward the church nor back to our respective lives. The kiss, brief as it was, had shattered a dam of restraint. Our eyes met again, communicating more than words could contain, memories of past flirtations, shared laughter, the thrill of proximity that life had once allowed freely and now forbade. Finally, I exhaled, a long, shaky breath. "We shouldn't." "No," she interrupted gently, placing a finger on my lips. "Not here, but somewhere else. Soon." I nodded, feeling both the weight of reality and the pull of inevitability. We separated reluctantly, each of us walking toward the church steps with a heaviness in our chests, yet an undeniable electricity lingering in the air. The ordinary Sunday morning had transformed into a clandestine moment that would replay endlessly in my memory, a private rebellion against the passage of time and the quiet resignation of old age. As I took my seat in the back pew, I glanced toward the entrance. Marguerite had disappeared into the congregation, and the sunlight fell across the aisle in patches, illuminating the dust motes like tiny golden angels. I realized then that life had shifted imperceptibly yet irrevocably. At 65, I had been kissed in a church parking lot, and nothing, marriage, propriety, age, would ever feel quite the same again. The priest's voice droned on, but I barely heard him. My mind replayed the kiss over and over, tracing the contours of her lips, the warmth of her hand in mine, the audacity of our daring. Outside, the leaves continued to tumble, indifferent to human transgressions. And I understood, with a quiet shock, that desire did not die, it merely waited, patient and insistent, for the right moment to return. Marguerite had kissed me in a church parking lot. And for the first time in decades, I felt dangerously, wonderfully alive. The Sunday service had ended hours ago, but the crisp autumn air still carried the scent of damp leaves and candle wax from St. Bridget's. I lingered near the back pew, pretending to examine the worn hymnals while my mind replayed the kiss, over and over. Every glance, every brush of skin, seemed magnified in the hush of the emptying church. My heart refused to settle. The calm of age, the supposed wisdom of 65, had no bearing on the chaos Marguerite stirred within me. She appeared at the doorway, her coat cinched loosely at the waist, hair slightly tousled by the wind. The congregation had thinned, leaving only a few stragglers and the lingering echo of the priest's final blessing. Her eyes sought mine across the polished wooden floors, and I felt the familiar thrum of anticipation that came with her presence. "Richard," she whispered, careful not to draw attention, though there was no one left to overhear. Her voice, low and warm, slid along my nerves like silk. Marguerite, I responded, my voice barely audible, though the weight of the word seemed heavy, laden with decades of restraint and longing. We walked together out of the church, our steps quiet on the old stone path. The crisp leaves crunched underfoot, and the shadows lengthened across the lot as the sun prepared to sink behind the eastern hills. Nobody else seemed to care about us, not our neighbors, not the old ladies tidying up hymnals, not even the wind that carried our secret along the empty street. I shouldn't have kissed you, I said finally, my voice breaking slightly. Shouldn't but did, she replied with a small smile, her eyes alight with mischief and sorrow intertwined. It's too late for regrets, Richard. We've spent so many years in silence. The words hit me with the force of truth. Silence had been our companion long before we understood its significance, a companion more intimate than any embrace, yet also more suffocating than any prison. And now, in this fading light, that silence had fractured, replaced with something urgent, tender, and terrifying. We reached her car, a modest sedan parked near the edge of the lot. She turned to face me, the autumn wind tugging gently at her scarf. The thought of a world beyond propriety, a life where desire and responsibility collided, flitted through my mind. Every step toward her felt like crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Shall we talk somewhere? She asked, hesitant but daring. Yes, I said, my chest tight. Somewhere private. The drive through Willow Creek was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves along the roadside and the low hum of the engine. We didn't speak much, and yet the quiet was comfortable, heavy with meaning. Each glance she cast my way was a brush of heat on skin that had grown used to cool distance. We ended up at a small café on the outskirts of town. One that had survived decades of change while retaining its old charm. The scent of fresh bread and coffee enveloped us as we entered, and we chose a corner table, away from the few patrons who had trickled in for afternoon pastries. Marguerite removed her coat, revealing a simple blouse that hugged her frame in a way that still made my chest tighten. I wasn't expecting this, she admitted, stirring her tea. To feel this alive now. I know, I said, my hands wrapped around my own cup. I thought those days were behind me. But I feel it too, the same pull. She nodded, eyes downcast, then lifted her gaze slowly, meeting mine. There was a vulnerability there. A raw honesty that had always existed beneath her composed exterior. Do you think we can? She asked, almost afraid to voice the question fully. We can, I said, though even as I spoke, I understood the enormity of what we were suggesting. Every moral lesson, every societal expectation, every whisper of conscience, everything pointed toward restraint. And yet, the desire to break free, to live fully in the fleeting time left to us, overpowered all reason. Our conversation meandered through memories of the past, laughter tinged with regret, and confessions that neither of us had dared to voice before. Each word, each pause, built a fragile bridge between the safety of our routines and the perilous excitement of the life we were about to entertain. By the time we left the café, the sun had disappeared behind the hills, and the world outside was painted in shades of twilight. Marguerite's hand brushed against mine as we walked to our cars. A silent affirmation of what had begun, what we could no longer deny. I suppose we'll have to be careful, she said softly, almost to herself, as if acknowledging the precariousness of our arrangement. Yes, I agreed, but careful doesn't mean we stop. We parted at the lot, each walking to our separate vehicles. hearts racing and minds full of unspoken promises. I drove home slowly, the autumn night pressing close, aware that this was only the beginning. At 65, life had found a way to surprise me. To stir long dormant passions and awaken desires I had thought long buried. Marguerite had kissed me in a church parking lot, and now, our journey had only just begun. The week that followed our clandestine café meeting felt surreal. Each day stretched by the tension of anticipation and the intoxicating memory of her lips on mine. I went through my routines mechanically, grocery shopping, watering the garden, shuffling through bills, yet every action seemed hollow without the thought of Marguerite lingering in the edges of my mind. Her smile, the warmth of her hand in mine, the daring audacity of that church parking lot kiss haunted me. As though the universe had conspired to remind me that desire did not adhere to calendars or age. On Wednesday, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper, written in her familiar, flowing script, "Meet me by the old mill at sunset. Just us." My pulse quickened as I folded it carefully, the paper smooth under my fingers. The old mill was a relic, a wooden structure at the edge of town where the river cut sharply through reeds and cattails. I had been there as a boy, sneaking away with a paper boat, imagining adventures far beyond Willow Creek. Yet now it felt like a fitting stage for our own quiet rebellion. That evening, the sky was painted with streaks of pink and gold, the river reflecting the fading light. Marguerite waited, leaning against the railing, hair tossed by the gentle breeze. The sight of her there, alone and expectant, stirred a thrill in my chest I hadn't felt in decades. "Richard," she said softly, her eyes sparkling with the reflected sunset. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." "Of course," I replied, stepping closer, my steps careful but eager. "I wouldn't miss this." We walked along the worn wooden planks, the boards creaking under our feet. The world around us seemed to recede, leaving only the gentle rush of the river, the chirping of evening crickets, and the subtle, shared electricity of our proximity. Marguerite's hand found mine again, fingers lacing naturally, as if no years had separated us. "I've thought about that kiss every day," I confessed, my voice almost lost to the wind. "I can't pretend it didn't mean something." Her lips curved into a bittersweet smile. "It did. And it does. I've missed feeling alive, Richard. Alive with someone who sees me, really sees me." The vulnerability in her voice, the honest admission, broke down the final barriers I had constructed around my heart. I leaned closer, compelled, drawn by the gravity of shared longing. This time, the kiss was longer, slower, tasting of river air and autumn leaves. A communion of all the unspoken years and stolen moments that had led to this precise point. When we finally parted, the world seemed sharper, more vibrant. Shadows of the mill stretched across the water. The soft hum of insects around us, a subtle symphony underscoring the enormity of what we had dared. "Do you think we can continue?" Marguerite asked quietly, almost hesitant, as though daring to hope yet afraid of reality's harsh interference. "I want to," I admitted, the words fragile but resolute. "But we must be careful. Our families, our reputations, they matter." She nodded, a shadow of sadness passing over her face. "I know. But Richard, we've spent too long living carefully. Maybe it's time we lived, just a little." And in that moment, I understood the paradox. Living fully often meant risking everything. And the thrill of our age, normally associated with caution, became a crucible for passion. Every choice felt heightened, every glance a spark against the tinder of years-long restraint. We lingered at the mill until the last light bled from the sky. Reluctant to return to the ordinary world, her fingers clung to mine as though anchoring us in a moment that refused to end. I knew, even then, that what we were starting could never be casual. It would alter the fabric of our lives, quietly but irrevocably. As we finally parted, heading toward our separate homes, a hush fell over Willow Creek. The quiet streets held our secret, and I realized that the danger, the fear of discovery, made every heartbeat sharper, every encounter more precious. Marguerite had kissed me in a church parking lot, and now, under the fading light of an autumn sunset, she had claimed a piece of my soul, daring me to respond in kind. Back home, I poured a glass of wine and stared at the river beyond the kitchen window, thinking of her, of the old mill, of the life I had long thought complete and now felt vibrantly unfinished. Desire had returned, insistent, and I could no longer ignore it.